Adelaide Penhaligon stood in front of the door for almost an hour before she touched the key. The hallway smelled of salt and old wood, the way every hallway in Tidewater House had smelled for the 51 years she had lived there. Outside, the wind off the Atlantic was working itself up the bluffs, rattling the loose pane in the kitchen window the way it did every November. Her hand shook a little when she finally lifted the brass key Mortimer had hidden in the lining of his fishing jacket. The jacket she had been folding for Goodwill that morning. The jacket she had almost given away without checking the pockets. Her late husband's will had been an insult, a public one, read aloud in a lawyer's office while his daughter Tabitha smirked from across the table. The estate, the investment accounts, the Boston condominium, the small portfolio of rental properties in Portsmouth, all of it went to Tabitha. Adelaide, after 51 years of marriage, inherited the salt-bleached Victorian on Gullwing Lane and one item Tabitha had laughed out loud at, a brass key with a tag that read only the back room. Tabitha had leaned across the polished table that day and said, in a voice loud enough for the lawyer's secretary to hear, that her father had finally given Adelaide what she deserved, a haunted house full of dust and a door no one had ever been meant to open. Adelaide had said nothing. She had sat with her hands folded in her lap, the way her mother had taught her to sit in church, and she had let Tabitha laugh. She had let Tabitha believe what Tabitha wanted to believe, because Adelaide knew something Tabitha did not. That door had been locked for 30 years. Mortimer had never spoken about it, never opened it in her presence, never once let her past it. And in 51 years of marriage, Mortimer Penhaligon had never lied to her about anything that mattered. Whatever was behind that door, he had wanted her to find it. The moment she turned the key and felt the old lock give, the wind seemed to drop, and what waited inside was a 30-year silence finally breaking, a secret that would bring Tabitha to her knees in a way no court ever could, and a truth about who Mortimer had really been when no one was watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Adelaide was 77 years old the morning of the will reading. She wore her good navy dress, the one she had bought for her sister Rosalind's funeral 6 years earlier, and she pinned her white hair into the same low knot she had worn since she was 40. She drove herself to the lawyer's office in Holloway Cove because Mortimer had always driven, and she still found the steering wheel of his old Buick a little too wide for her hands. The lawyer was a young man named Henley, the son of the lawyer who had drawn up Mortimer's papers 30 years ago, and Henley had the decency to look uncomfortable when Tabitha walked in. Tabitha was 53. She arrived in a camel coat and pearl earrings and a cloud of perfume that made Adelaide's eyes water. Her husband Roderick followed 3 steps behind her, carrying her purse the way he always did. Tabitha was Mortimer's daughter from his first marriage, from the brief and unhappy 4 years he had spent with a woman named Constance before Constance walked out and left him with a 6-year-old child and a stack of unpaid bills. Adelaide had married Mortimer when Tabitha was 8. She had raised the girl. She had packed lunches and sewed Halloween costumes and stayed up nights when Tabitha had croup, and Tabitha had repaid her with 30 years of cold politeness and 20 more of open contempt. Mortimer had seen it. Mortimer had grieved it privately, but he had loved his daughter, and he had hoped, the way fathers hope, that one day Tabitha would soften. She had not softened. She had hardened into someone who measured every relationship by what it could give her. And the moment Mortimer's heart gave out in the garden last August, Tabitha had begun making phone calls. Henley read the will in his careful young voice, the Boston condominium to Tabitha, the investment accounts to Tabitha, the rental properties to Tabitha, the vintage car collection Mortimer had spent 40 years assembling, also to Tabitha. Adelaide kept her face still. She had expected this. Mortimer had warned her, in a quiet conversation on the porch 2 summers before he died, that he was leaving most of the visible estate to his daughter. "She'll need it more than you will," he had said, and squeezed her hand, and would not explain what he meant. When Henley reached the part about Tidewater House and the brass key, Tabitha actually laughed. "My father had a sense of humor at the end," she said. "Adelaide gets the haunted house and a door that doesn't open. How fitting." She turned to Adelaide with that same smile she had been giving her since she was 14, the smile that said, "I am tolerating you. Don't worry, dear. You can stay in the house as long as you can pay the property taxes. The bluff is eroding, you know. Daddy told me. The whole place will be in the ocean within the decade." She tilted her head. "Where will you go then, I wonder?" Roderick chuckled into his hand. Adelaide thanked Henley quietly, accepted the envelope with the key inside, and walked out without speaking to her stepdaughter. In the parking lot, sitting in Mortimer's Buick with the engine off, she opened the envelope and read the note he had paper-clipped to the key. His handwriting was the same shaky script it had been at the end, when his hands had begun to tremble from the medication. "Addie," it read, "you'll know when you're ready. Everything you need is in the room. The truth will keep until you find it. I am sorry for the years you didn't know. I never meant to keep it from you, only to protect what mattered. All my love, always. Mort." She read the note 3 times. She folded it carefully into her wallet. And then, for the first time since the funeral, Adelaide Penhaligon allowed herself to cry. Adelaide drove the long way home from the lawyer's office. She took the coast road past the lighthouse, past the cove where Mortimer used to launch his rowboat in the summers, past the bench they had sat on the night he proposed to her in 1972. She was 26 then. He was 34, divorced, raising a child alone, working as a research librarian at the Maine Historical Society in Portland, and so quiet that most people mistook the quiet for shyness. Adelaide had known better even then. Mortimer was not shy. Mortimer was watchful. He listened the way some people pray, with full attention, and when he spoke, his words were chosen the way a carpenter chose nails, one at a time, for what each was meant to hold. She had loved him from the second month of knowing him. She had married him in the spring of 1973 in a small ceremony at the Congregational Church on Main Street, with 8-year-old Tabitha standing beside them in a yellow dress and a frown. The first 10 years of their marriage had been ordinary in the way good marriages are ordinary. Mortimer worked at the Historical Society. Adelaide taught 5th grade at Holloway Cove Elementary. They saved money. They fixed up Tidewater House 1 room at a time. They took Tabitha to the beach on weekends and to Boston once a year for the Nutcracker. Adelaide could not have children of her own, a fact that had grieved her in private and that Mortimer had absorbed without complaint. "We have Tabitha," he would say, and she would nod, and they would both pretend that Tabitha was enough, even when it became clear, year by year, that Tabitha would never let Adelaide fully into the place a daughter's love should have been. The change came in 1995. Adelaide remembered the year clearly because it was the year her mother died, the year Tabitha left for college, and the year Mortimer began locking the back room. She had not noticed it at first. The room had always been Mortimer's study, a small square room on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall, with 1 window facing the sea and 1 wall of bookshelves he had built himself. He used it for his research. He kept his typewriter there, and later his computer, and a filing cabinet full of papers from the Historical Society. Adelaide had gone in and out of the room freely for 22 years. She had brought him tea. She had vacuumed. She had borrowed his stapler. Then one evening in September of 1995, she had gone upstairs to call him for supper, and the door had been closed. She had tried the handle, and it had not turned. She had knocked, and Mortimer had opened it from the inside, and his face had a look on it she had never seen before, something between fear and apology. He had stepped out into the hallway, pulled the door shut behind him, and locked it with a key he had taken from his pocket. "Addie," he had said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me." She had waited. "I'm going to keep this room locked from now on. I'm not going to tell you why. I'm going to ask you, please, never to ask me. I'm not having an affair. I'm not in any trouble. I'm not hiding anything that would hurt you. But there are things in this room that aren't mine to share, not even with you. Can you live with that?" Adelaide had looked at him for a long moment. She had been 49 years old. She had been married to him for 22 years. She had known the cadence of his breathing in his sleep and the way he hummed when he was working through a problem and the small scar on his left thumb from a fishhook in 1981. She had known him. "Yes," she had said. "I can live with that." He had kissed her forehead. They had gone downstairs and eaten supper, and Adelaide had never asked him about the room again. She had wondered, of course, sometimes in the years that followed. She had wondered if he was writing a book he was ashamed of, or keeping correspondence with an old lover, or hoarding something embarrassing the way some men hoarded pornography or gambling slips. She had considered all the ordinary betrayals. None of them fit. Mortimer came home every night. He took her hand at the dinner table. He left her notes in her lunch bag well into her 60s when she retired from teaching. He made love to her on Sunday mornings the way he had since they were newlyweds. Whatever was behind that door, it was not another woman, and it was not a man either. She would have known. A wife of 22 years knows, so she let it be. She let the door stay locked. For 30 years she walked past it on her way to the linen closet, and she did not turn the handle, and she did not press her ear against the wood, and she did not even once search his pockets for the key. He went into the room 3 or 4 times a week, usually in the evening, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 4. He came out tired. He came out occasionally with red eyes, the way a man comes out of a long phone call with bad news. He never explained. She never asked. It was the one closed door in their marriage, and they had agreed in their wordless way that some doors could stay closed and the marriage would still hold. The night before he died, he had gone into the room one last time. He had stayed for nearly 6 hours. When he came out well past midnight, Adelaide had been awake, reading in bed. He had sat down on the edge of the mattress and taken her hand and said, "Addie, when I'm gone, you'll find a key. Promise me you won't be afraid of what's inside." "I'm not afraid of anything you've ever done," she had said. He had smiled, the slow, tired smile she had loved for 51 years. "I know," he had said. "That's why I married you." 3 weeks later, in the garden behind the house, weeding the tomato beds, Mortimer Penhaligon sat down on the grass and did not get up again. Adelaide found him at 4:30 in the afternoon, his hand still curled around a clump of basil, his face peaceful, as if he had only meant to rest a moment. That was August. It was now November. The key was in her hand. The door was in front of her, and after 51 years of marriage and 30 years of waiting, Adelaide Penhaligon was finally ready to learn what her husband had been protecting. She turned the key. The lock turned more easily than Adelaide had expected. There was a soft click, the sound of a mechanism that had been oiled and maintained, not the dry scrape of something neglected. Mortimer had been taking care of this lock. The thought caught her in the chest before the door had even opened. She pushed it open slowly. The hinges were silent. He had oiled those too. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not dust, not mildew, not the closed-up staleness she had been bracing for. The room smelled of cedar and clean paper and a faint trace of something chemical that reminded her of the photo lab at the high school where she had volunteered as a chaperone in the 1980s. It was the smell of a place that had been used, and used carefully, for a very long time. The second thing she noticed was the light. Mortimer had installed track lighting along the ceiling, the warm kind that museums use, set on a low setting that came on automatically when the door opened. She had not heard a switch click. There must have been a sensor. She stepped inside. The room was nothing like the study she remembered from 1995. The bookshelves Mortimer had built were still there, but they no longer held his research books. They held binders, hundreds of binders, hand-labeled in his careful printing, organized by year, 1995, 1996, 1997, all the way to 2024. The shelves on the opposite wall held something stranger, a system of small archival boxes, each labeled with a number and a code she did not recognize. The filing cabinet she had vacuumed around for years had been replaced by 4 taller cabinets, all locked, all bearing the same brass keyholes. A long work table ran beneath the window, and on the table sat a computer she had never seen him buy, a flatbed scanner, a magnifying lamp, and a small leather notebook lying open as if he had stepped away from it for a moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Adelaide walked to the work table first. Her legs felt heavy, the way they had felt at the funeral, a body refusing to believe what the mind already knew. She picked up the leather notebook. The handwriting was Mortimer's, the same shaky script from his last years. October 14th, 2024. Case number 2847. Clarissa M., adopted Bangor, 1962, biological mother located, Glens Falls, NY, letter mailed today. God willing, an answer by month's end. She read it twice. The words made sense individually. Together they did not. She turned the page. October 21st, 2024. Reply from Glens Falls. Mother deceased, 2019. Sister located, willing to make contact. Have forwarded contact information to Clarissa. This one will land softly, I think. She turned another page. November 2nd, 2024. Clarissa called. She wept on the phone. She has a sister. She is 62 years old and she has a sister. I told her her mother had searched for her every year on her birthday. It was true. The records showed it. May this be enough. May this be the gift her mother could not give her in life. Adelaide set the notebook down. Her hand was trembling. She turned to the bookshelves and pulled out a binder at random, 2003. She opened it on the work table. It was a case file. The first page held a photograph of a woman in her 40s, paper-clipped to a typed biography. Below the biography, a handwritten genealogical chart traced the woman's biological family back 4 generations. Birth records, hospital records, sealed adoption documents that should not have been in a private home. Letters, photographs of strangers who shared the woman's eyes. The last page in the file was a photocopy of a Christmas card. The handwriting on the card was unfamiliar. "Dear Mortimer," it read, "I cannot put into words what you have given me. I met my mother last week. She is 81 years old and she has been waiting for me my entire life. I will never know how to thank you. Please accept the enclosed donation toward your continued work. With everything I have, Margaret." Adelaide closed the binder. She stood in the room and let her eyes travel across the shelves. 29 years of binders. Hundreds of them. If each binder held even 10 cases, Mortimer had reunited thousands of people. Thousands of adopted children with their birth families. Thousands of mothers who had given up babies in eras when the records were sealed and the laws made finding them almost impossible. He had done it from this room. From a room in their house. While she had been in the kitchen making supper, while she had been grading 5th-grade essays at the dining room table, while she had been believing that her husband was a quiet, retired librarian who tinkered upstairs in the evenings. She walked slowly along the shelves. She found a section of the wall she had not seen at first, a corkboard mounted between 2 of the cabinets. The corkboard was covered in photographs, dozens of them, snapshots and Polaroids and printed digital pictures, all showing the same kind of scene. 2 people meeting. 2 people embracing. 2 people holding each other in airports and front yards and hospital rooms and on the steps of nondescript houses. Mothers and the children they had never been allowed to keep. Siblings who had not known the other existed. Fathers who had been told their child was dead. Adelaide looked at face after face. Some of them were crying. Most of them were smiling the way people smile only once in their lives, a smile that knows it is impossible. At the bottom of the corkboard, pinned with a single thumbtack, was a small index card in Mortimer's handwriting. It read, "Every reunion is a debt repaid to the woman who never got hers. Ma nachted as sobers ors, MP, 1995. Adelaide read the card 3 times before she understood it. Then she sat down on the floor of the room she had not entered in 30 years, with her back against the work table and her hands in her lap, and she understood that she had not known her husband at all. She had known him completely. Both things were true. Adelaide sat on the floor for a long time. The track lighting hummed faintly above her. Outside, the wind off the bluff had settled into the steady moan it kept up most nights from October to March, a sound she had stopped hearing decades ago. She listened to it now. She listened to her own breathing. She tried to make her mind hold the shape of what she had just learned, and her mind kept slipping off it, the way a hand slips off a doorknob when the hand is shaking too hard. After a while, she got up. Her knees protested. She put her palm against the work table to steady herself and noticed for the first time that the table had a drawer she had not seen, set into the underside with a small pull recessed into the wood. She opened it. Inside the drawer was a manila envelope, unsealed, with her name written across the front in Mortimer's hand. Just Addie. No date, no instructions. She lifted it out and carried it to the upholstered chair he kept in the corner of the room, the one she had not noticed when she first walked in because it had been turned to face the bookshelves, as if he had spent his evenings sitting there reading through his own work. She sat in the chair and opened the envelope. It held 3 things. A letter to her, 10 pages long in his shaky last-year handwriting. A photograph she had never seen of a young woman holding a baby in front of a brick building, and a small newspaper clipping, yellowed and folded into a square no bigger than a playing card. She read the letter first. "Addie, my love, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found the room, and you have started to understand what I have been doing. I am going to try to explain it to you the way I should have explained it 30 years ago. I was a coward then. I hope you will forgive me for the cowardice and not for the silence, because the silence I would do again. There were people whose lives depended on it. You knew my mother died when I was 11. You did not know that she was not my biological mother. The woman who raised me, the woman whose grave we visit in Augusta, was my adoptive mother. Her name was Mortimer Penhaligon, and she was the kindest woman I have ever known besides you. She told me when I was 9 that I was adopted, and she told me she did not know who my biological mother was, because the records had been sealed in 1939 and the agency that handled my adoption had burned in a fire in 1952. She told me she was sorry. She told me she loved me. She told me if I ever wanted to look, she would help me look. I never looked, not while she was alive. It felt like a betrayal of the only mother I had ever known. After she died, I tried, and I ran into the same wall every adopted person of my generation ran into. Sealed records. State laws written to protect the privacy of mothers who in many cases had never asked for that protection, who had been told by social workers and clergymen and their own families that they had no choice. I spent 20 years trying to find the woman who gave birth to me. I found her in 1994. She had died in 1991. She had spent 43 years writing letters to an adoption agency that no longer existed, asking if her son was alive. The letters were in a box in her sister's attic. Her sister gave them to me. I read every one of them on the train back to Maine. That is when I started the work. I could not get my own reunion, but I could give other people theirs. I had the research training. I had the patience. I had the access through the Historical Society to records most people could not reach. I had a small inheritance from Eleanor that paid for the early years. By the time the inheritance ran out, the people I had helped were sending donations, and the work paid for itself. The reason I never told you, Addie, the reason I locked the door, it was never about you. It was about them. The people who came to me came in confidence. The biological mothers, especially, were often terrified. Many of them had never told their husbands. Many of them had been told by their own families that the child had died. To do this work, I had to promise absolute confidentiality, and I could not promise that, and also tell my wife. Even a wife I trusted with my life, especially a wife I trusted with my life. Because if anything ever happened, if any of these cases ever went to court, I wanted to be the only person who could be subpoenaed. I should have told you anyway. I see that now. I see it because I am dying and there is no one else to carry this work, and the only person I trust to carry it is you. The room is yours. The cases are yours. The decisions about what to do with them are yours. There is also money, Addie, a great deal of it. Tabitha did not get the visible estate by accident. She got the visible estate because the real estate was in this room, and I was not going to let her have it. I will explain that on the next page. Adelaide turned the page. The donations have been coming in for 30 years. I never spent them on myself. I invested them. The account is at Bay State Mutual under the name of the Penhaligon Reunion Trust, and you are the sole trustee. As of last month, it held just over $14 million. I am sorry I never told you. I am sorry you spent 30 years thinking we lived close to the edge. We did not live close to the edge. We lived where we did because I wanted you to know me as a man, not as a man with money, and because I was saving every dollar of it for the work and for you. She put the letter down. She picked up the photograph. The young woman holding the baby looked perhaps 19. She had Mortimer's mouth. She was not smiling. She was looking at the camera with an expression Adelaide had seen only once before, on the face of a girl in her 5th grade class whose mother had died the week before, a kind of looking that had no word for it because the feeling underneath it was too large for words. The baby in her arms was Mortimer. Adelaide knew it the way she knew her own face in the bathroom mirror. The shape of his head had not changed in 78 years. She unfolded the newspaper clipping last. It was an obituary. Margaret Ainsworth of Lewiston died Tuesday after a long illness. She was 71. She is survived by no immediate family. Margaret Ainsworth. Adelaide stared at the name. She did not yet know why it mattered, but she felt, the way a person feels weather changing in her bones, that it was going to matter very much. Adelaide spent the rest of the night in the room. She did not sleep. She made herself a pot of tea around midnight and brought it upstairs in Mortimer's old thermos, the one with the dent in the lid from the time he had dropped it on the rocks at Pemaquid Point in 1987. She sat in the upholstered chair with the thermos at her feet, and she read. She read the binders in chronological order, starting from 1995. She read about a woman named Helen who had given up a baby in Bangor in 1958 and had been told by the hospital that the child was stillborn. The child had been very much alive, adopted by a family in Vermont, and had grown up to be a pediatric nurse named Joyce. Mortimer had reunited them in 1996. Helen had lived another 4 years after meeting her daughter. Joyce had been holding her hand when she died. She read about a man named Theodore who had been left at a fire station in Portland in 1944 with no name and no papers, and who had spent 51 years believing he had no people in the world. Mortimer had found his birth mother's family in 1997. The mother was dead, but Theodore had 3 half-sisters in New Hampshire who had grown up hearing whispered stories about a baby their mother had lost in the war. They had never stopped looking. The reunion had taken place in a diner in Concord. There were photographs of it pinned to the corkboard. Theodore was wearing a tie. She read about siblings separated at 4 and 6, reunited at 58 and 60. A woman who learned at 72 that her birth father had been a Tuskegee airman. A man who discovered he was the biological grandson of a Russian poet, whose books had been banned in 3 countries. A girl adopted in 1972, who had spent her whole adult life feeling that something was missing from her own face, and who, when she met her birth mother, had wept because the mother's face was finally the answer. Mortimer had recorded each of these stories in his careful handwriting. He had not sentimentalized them. He had written them down the way a doctor writes down vital signs, with precision and without flourish, and the precision was what made them unbearable to read. By the time Adelaide reached the binders from the 2010s, the sky outside the window had begun to turn the slow gray of a Maine November dawn. She stopped to rest her eyes. She thought about Mortimer downstairs in the kitchen all those mornings, drinking his coffee, asking her how she had slept. While upstairs in this room there were thousands of pages of human grief and human rescue that he had carried alone for 30 years. She thought about her own questions, the ones she had not let herself ask in 1995. She thought about how angry she might have been if she had insisted on knowing, and how the anger would have been right in a way, and how the silence had also been right, and how marriages were sometimes built on 2 right things that contradicted each other, and how the only way to keep the marriage was to live inside the contradiction without trying to fix it. She had lived inside it. He had lived inside it. They had loved each other across it. She would not now let herself begin to wish it had been otherwise. He had told her in the letter why. The why was good enough. The why was, in fact, the best thing she had ever heard about her husband, and he had been a good man for 51 years, so the bar had been high. She got up to stretch her legs and walked to the cabinets. The brass keys, for those she had figured out, were in a small wooden box on the work table, each labeled with a Roman numeral that matched a numeral burned into the wood above each cabinet. She had not opened the cabinets yet. She had been working through the binders first, the way Mortimer would have wanted her to, building the context before she went to the locked things. She opened Cabinet I. Inside were files arranged in alphabetical order by surname. These, she understood after a moment of looking, were the active cases, the ones Mortimer had not finished. The cases where the search was still ongoing, or where one party had been found and the other had not yet been contacted, or where the people involved were too fragile to be approached. Each file had a colored tab. Green meant ready to proceed, yellow meant on hold, red meant do not contact or not yet. She ran her fingers along the tabs. Most were green, some were yellow, a few were red. Near the back of the cabinet, in the P section, she found a file with a red tab. The label read Penhaligon, T. Her stomach went cold. She pulled the file out with hands that had stopped trembling and gone still in the way hands go still, when the body has decided to handle something the mind cannot yet handle. She carried it to the work table. She sat down. She opened it. In 1989, Tabitha had been 17 in her senior year at Holloway Cove High School, a year Adelaide remembered as the year Tabitha had spent the spring semester at her grandmother's house in upstate New York, recovering from what Mortimer had called exhaustion. Adelaide had wondered at the time. She had wondered enough to ask once, gently, and Mortimer had said, "She needs space, Addie. Let it be." She had let it be. She had let her stepdaughter spend 5 months in another state, and she had welcomed Tabitha home in August, thinner and quieter and wearing a sweater that was too big for her in the hot August weather, and she had not asked. She turned the page. The second page was Mortimer's research. He had been searching for the child for nearly 20 years. He had located him in 2008. The boy, now a man, was named Jonah Riley, and he was living in Burlington, Vermont, working as a high school music teacher. He was married. He had 2 daughters. He had been told he was adopted at the age of 6, and he had said, in a letter to the agency in 2007, that he had no interest in finding his biological parents and asked that no contact be made. The third page was a copy of that letter. The fourth page was Mortimer's note to himself, dated 2009. Tabitha must not know. Not yet. Perhaps never. The boy has built a life it is not mine to disturb. But the file stays open in case he changes his mind. The mother also. Adelaide closed the file. She sat in the chair with her hands folded over the manila cover, and she understood completely and at once why Tabitha was the way Tabitha was. The hardness, the greed, the need to take and take from a stepmother who had never been allowed close. Tabitha had given up a child at 17 and had spent 35 years pretending she had not, and the pretending had eaten her from the inside, the way pretending always does. Mortimer had known. Mortimer had carried it. Mortimer had protected his daughter's secret for 35 years, even as his daughter had stopped being a person he could be proud of, because that was what fathers did, and he had been a father before he had been anything else. Adelaide put the file back in the cabinet exactly where she had found it. She closed the door. She locked it. She put the key back in the wooden box. She knew now what she was going to do. She knew it the way she had known, 51 years ago, that she was going to marry Mortimer Penhaligon. The knowing was quiet and complete, and it left no room for doubt. She went downstairs to make breakfast. Adelaide gave herself 3 days before she did anything. She thought it was important to wait. She had learned in 51 years of marriage to a careful man that decisions made in the first heat of knowing were almost always the wrong decisions. Mortimer had taught her to sleep on things. He had taught her that the truth did not change overnight, and neither did the right response to it, and a person who waited 3 days before acting was almost always more useful than a person who acted in 3 hours. So she made breakfast. She washed the dishes. She walked down to the post office to mail the thank you cards she still owed people from the funeral. She accepted a casserole from her neighbor Esme Lockridge, who had been bringing casseroles every Tuesday since August, and who had finally, that week, started bringing only 1 casserole instead of 2. Esme was 79 and had lived 3 doors down on Gullwing Lane since 1981. She was the only person in Holloway Cove who had loved Mortimer the way Adelaide had loved him, in the long, quiet way of people who had known him for decades and seen him be patient with difficult children and difficult dogs. Esme came in for tea that Tuesday, and Adelaide almost told her. She came close. She had the words ready in her mouth. Then she remembered Mortimer's letter, the part about confidentiality, and she swallowed the words and listened to Esme talk about her grandson's wedding instead. After 3 days, she called a lawyer. Not Henley, the young man who had read the will. Henley was a fine boy, but his father had been Mortimer's lawyer, and the firm had handled Tabitha's affairs as well, and Adelaide did not want anyone in that office near what she was about to do. She drove to Portland on a gray Thursday and met with a woman named Yolanda Bashir, whose name she had pulled from a list of attorneys recommended by the Bar Association for trust and estate work. Yolanda was in her early 40s, originally from Detroit, sharp-eyed and direct in a way that reminded Adelaide of her sister Rosalind. She listened to Adelaide's story for almost 2 hours without interrupting except to ask clarifying questions. When Adelaide was done, Yolanda set down her pen and said, "Mrs. Penhaligon, I want to take this case. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been practicing for 16 years and I've never heard anything like it. We are going to do this carefully and we are going to do it right." Adelaide drove home feeling, for the first time since August, that she was not entirely alone. Over the next 8 weeks, Yolanda and Adelaide built the framework. They established a 501c3 foundation under the name Mortimer had used in his trust. They transferred the Penhaligon Reunion Trust into the foundation's name. They hired a forensic accountant to audit the $14 million and confirm that every cent of it was clean and properly documented, which it was because Mortimer had been the kind of man who kept receipts for 30 years. They hired a small staff, a genealogist named Beatrice O'Harry, who had spent her career helping descendants of enslaved people trace their family lines and who understood in her bones why this work mattered. A retired social worker named Adelaide hired contractors to restore the back room itself. She had the climate control system updated. She had the cabinets refitted with proper archival drawers. She had a second room on the 3rd floor cleared out and fitted as an office for Beatrice and Henrietta. She did not change the original room. The corkboard stayed, the chair stayed. The little wooden box of cabinet keys stayed exactly where Mortimer had left it. She wanted whoever continued the work after her to find it the way she had found it. She made one decision that surprised even Yolanda. She decided not to publicize the work. The foundation would operate in the same quiet way Mortimer had operated. Cases would come by referral, the way they always had. The donors would be informed by mail, with a letter explaining that Mortimer had died and that his wife was carrying the work forward. There would be no press release. There would be no website beyond a single page with a phone number and an address. Mortimer had built this in silence for 30 years, and Adelaide was not going to turn it into a story for the Portland papers, because she had finally been let into the secret. The work was the point. The people were the point. Her own vindication was nobody's business. She did, however, make one preparation that was not about the work. She had Yolanda quietly compile a complete copy of the Tabitha file, including all of Mortimer's research, the hospital records, the relinquishment papers, the correspondence with the agency, and the photograph of Jonah Riley that Mortimer had obtained in 2008. Yolanda had the copies notarized and placed in a safe deposit box at a bank in Boston, with instructions that they were to be released only on Adelaide's written word or in the event of her death. The original file stayed in Cabinet Y, exactly where Mortimer had left it. Adelaide did not intend to use it, but she had been raised by a woman who had taught her to know where the door was before she walked into a room, and she was not going to be a woman who walked into a confrontation with a person like Tabitha without knowing where the door was. The first sign that Tabitha was coming arrived in the third week of January, a registered letter from a law firm in Boston, demanding an inspection of the property under a clause Tabitha had apparently dug up in some old document related to the original purchase of Tidewater House in 1969. The clause was nonsense. Yolanda dismissed it in a one-page response, and Adelaide heard nothing more for 2 weeks. The second sign came in early February. An assessor from the county arrived unannounced one morning, claiming that Tidewater House had been flagged for a structural review related to coastal erosion. Adelaide, who had lived on the bluff for 51 years and watched the same 10 feet of dune line come and go with the seasons, knew exactly who had flagged it. She let the assessor in. She made him coffee. She walked him through the house with the calm of a woman who had nothing to hide and everything in order, and she watched his face go from official to puzzled to slightly embarrassed, as he realized that the house was in better structural condition than half the homes in Holloway Cove. He left without filing a report. The third sign came on a Saturday morning in late February. Adelaide was in the kitchen, peeling apples for a pie she had no intention of eating alone, when she heard a car coming up Gullwing Lane. She knew the sound of the engine before she looked out the window. Tabitha had arrived. Tabitha had not driven herself. Roderick was at the wheel of the silver SUV, easing it up the gravel drive with the careful slowness of a man who was used to being told he was doing things wrong. Tabitha sat in the passenger seat with her phone in her hand, already typing something, already preparing whatever script she had rehearsed on the 4-hour drive up from Boston. Adelaide watched them from the kitchen window. She wiped her hands on the dish towel. She took off her apron. She walked to the small mirror in the front hall and looked at herself for a moment the way a woman looks at herself before a wedding or a funeral or a meeting she's been preparing for in silence for months. Her white hair was in its usual low knot. She was wearing a charcoal cardigan and a wool skirt and the small pearl earrings Mortimer had given her on their 25th anniversary. She did not put on lipstick. She did not change her clothes. She wanted Tabitha to see exactly the woman Tabitha had spent 35 years dismissing, and she wanted Tabitha to understand by the end of the next hour that she had never seen this woman at all. "You've redecorated." A little. That must have been expensive." It was. Tabitha sat down on the settee. Roderick stood by the window. Adelaide poured the coffee into the good china and handed Tabitha a cup. She did not pour one for Roderick. He had not asked. "Adelaide," Tabitha set her cup down without drinking, "I'm going to be direct with you. The house is too much for you. You're 77 years old. The bluff is unstable, whatever your assessor said. I've spoken to a developer in Boston who is willing to make a generous offer for the property. We can have you settled in a very comfortable assisted living community in Portland by spring. I'll handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger." "That's kind of you," Adelaide said. Tabitha blinked. She had been expecting resistance. The mildness threw her. "I want you to understand," she went on, recovering, "that this isn't a request. The structural review is going to come back negative. It's only a matter of time. I'd rather we handle this between family before it becomes a public matter. I see. Daddy would have wanted you taken care of. Yes, Adelaide said. He would have. Tabitha leaned forward. She was warming to her own performance. Adelaide, I know we haven't always been close. I know I've been hard on you sometimes. I want you to know that I'm trying to do right by you here. This is me being generous. The house is worth maybe $400,000 on a good day. The developer has offered $6. I'll see that you get $150 of it as a goodwill gesture. You can live very comfortably on that. Adelaide set her coffee cup down carefully on the saucer. Tabitha, she said, I'd like to show you something. She stood. Tabitha stood too, more slowly, suspicion gathering in her face. Roderick did not move from the window. Adelaide led Tabitha out of the parlor, across the front hall, up the stairs. She walked at a pace that did not hurry. Tabitha followed. They reached the second floor. They walked down the long hallway, past the linen closet, past the bedroom Tabitha had slept in until she was 18, all the way to the end of the hall, to the back room. Daddy's old study, Tabitha said. Her voice had changed. The hall light caught something in her eyes that Adelaide could not read. He kept it locked. He never let anyone in there. He let one person in, Adelaide said, after he died. She took the brass key out of her cardigan pocket. She unlocked the door. She opened it. The track lighting came on automatically. Tabitha stepped into the doorway. She stopped. She stared at the bookshelves, the cabinets, the work table, the corkboard with its dozens of photographs of strangers embracing strangers. Her mouth opened slightly. She did not speak. I want to show you a file, Adelaide said. She walked to cabinet Y. She opened it. She found the file she had not touched since November, the file with the red tab and the label that read Penhaligon Tea. She carried it to the work table. She set it down. She stepped back. You may read it if you wish. You don't have to. The contents are already familiar to you. Tabitha walked to the table the way a woman walks toward a mirror she does not want to look into. She opened the file. Adelaide watched her stepdaughter's face, and she saw the 35 years of pretending leave Tabitha's body all at once, the way air leaves a balloon when the knot is untied. Tabitha sat down hard in Mortimer's chair. She did not cry. Tabitha had never been a woman who cried easily, but her hands began to shake, and the shaking was something Adelaide had never seen in her stepdaughter before, and the shaking did not stop. How? Tabitha said. The word came out dry. How long has he had this? He found him in 2008. Found who? Tabitha's voice cracked on the who. Your son. His name is Jonah. He's a music teacher in Burlington. He's married. He has 2 daughters. Your father respected his wishes. He wished to be left alone. The file has been closed since 2009. Tabitha put her hands over her face. Your father was the kindest man I have ever known, Adelaide said. He kept your secret for 35 years. He kept it from me. He kept it from everyone. He did it because he loved you. Even when you stopped being a person, it was easy to love. He left you the visible estate because he knew you needed it, because he knew you had been hollowing yourself out for 35 years, carrying something you would not put down, and he hoped somehow that money would be a kind of comfort. It was the only thing he had left to give you. Tabitha did not move. I am not going to use this against you, Adelaide said. I could. There are copies in a safe deposit box in Boston. My lawyer has instructions, but I am not going to use it. Your father did not protect this for 35 years so that I could weaponize it the moment he was in the ground. I am telling you about it because I want you to understand who your father was and who I am, and why you are going to leave this house now and not come back with developers or assessors or lawyers. The house is mine. The work is mine. You will not interfere again. Do you understand? Tabitha nodded into her hands. Look at me, Tabitha. Tabitha looked up. Her face was wet. I forgave you a long time ago, Adelaide said. For all of it. I'm telling you that now because your father would have wanted you to hear it, and because I am the only person left who can tell you. If you ever want to know your son, the file is here. He may say no. He may say yes. That is between you and him. I will not be involved. But the door, Tabitha, the door is not closed. Tabitha put her face back into her hands and wept the way a woman weeps who has not allowed herself to weep in 35 years. Adelaide stood in the doorway of the back room and watched her stepdaughter cry, and she did not move to comfort her, and she did not move to leave. She simply stood there the way Mortimer had stood in this room for 30 years, keeping watch over something fragile that had been entrusted to her. After a long time, Tabitha got up. She walked past Adelaide without speaking. She went down the stairs. The front door closed. The car started. The gravel crunched. Adelaide locked the room and went downstairs to finish her pie. Tabitha did not come back. She did not call. The developer in Boston withdrew his offer in early March, citing what his assistant described in a stiff letter to Yolanda as a reassessment of the family's commercial interests in the property. The structural review never came. The assessor never returned. Whatever Tabitha did with the months that followed, she did somewhere far from Holloway Cove, and Adelaide did not ask after her. And Esme Lockridge, who knew everyone's business in 3 counties, mentioned once that Tabitha and Roderick had sold the Boston condominium and bought a smaller place in western Massachusetts. But she did not press, and Adelaide did not encourage her to. She kept Mortimer's chair in the back room exactly where he had left it. She sat in it most evenings after supper, going through the active files, learning the work the way a new librarian learns the stacks, slowly and without shortcuts. She made mistakes. Beatrice corrected her gently. Henrietta corrected her less gently, which Adelaide preferred because she had been a 5th-grade teacher for 31 years, and she knew that gentle correction taught nothing. By the end of April, Adelaide had personally handled 3 reunions from start to finish. She had cried at each one. She had cried in the back room after the families had left, in the chair where Mortimer had cried for 30 years. She understood now why he had come out of that room with red eyes some evenings. The work did that to you. The work was the cost of itself. The garden came back in May the way it always did. Adelaide weeded the tomato beds where Mortimer had died. She planted basil in the same place his hand had been curled around a clump of basil that August afternoon. She did not find it morbid. She found it the opposite. She found it like keeping faith with him, the same way she was keeping faith with his work upstairs, the same way she was keeping faith with the strangers in the photographs on the corkboard, the ones who had been given back to each other across decades and silences. On a Saturday morning in late May, a small blue car came up Gullwing Lane and parked at the curb. Adelaide was on the porch with her coffee, watching a pair of warblers fight over the sweat feeder Mortimer had hung from the eaves in 2003. She set her cup down. She watched the woman in the car sit at the steering wheel for almost 10 minutes before getting out. Adelaide knew that hesitation. She had seen it in dozens of photographs by now. The long pause of a person who had driven a long way to ask for something they were not sure they had the right to ask for. The woman who finally got out of the car was perhaps 33. She was small and dark-haired and dressed in the careful clothes of a person who had thought a great deal about what to wear. She carried a brown envelope. She walked up the path slowly, looking at the house the way people look at houses they have only seen in their imagination. And when she reached the porch steps, she stopped and said, "Are you Mrs. Penhaligon?" "I am. My name is Florence Ainsworth. I'm sorry to come without calling. I wasn't sure how to call. I was hoping I could speak with you about your husband." Adelaide felt her hand find the porch railing without her telling it to. "Florence," she said, "please come up. Sit down. I have coffee. I have time. Whatever you need." Florence sat. Adelaide brought out a second cup. The warblers had settled their argument and gone. The morning was very quiet. "My mother was Margaret Ainsworth," Florence said. "She died last autumn. She was 71. She set the brown envelope on the table between them. "I was going through her papers in February and I found letters, years of letters, to and from a man named Mortimer Penhaligon. They were about me, Mrs. Penhaligon. I was adopted. I didn't know. My mother never told me. The letters made it clear that your husband had been helping her. He was trying to find someone, her birth daughter, me." Adelaide put her hand to her mouth. "He found me," Florence said. "He found me in 2019. There's a letter from him to my mother dated November of that year. He had located her birth daughter. The daughter was me. He had my address in Portland. He had my work. I was at the Children's Hospital then. I still am. He wrote to my mother and asked what she wanted to do. The next letter is from her. She told him she could not. She said she had given me up at 16 and she had spent her life not deserving me back. She asked him to close the file. He wrote back and told her he would honor her wishes, but that the file would stay open in case she changed her mind. She never did." Florence's eyes were full. "She died without telling me. She died, Mrs. Penhaligon, knowing exactly where I was and not telling me because she thought I was better off." "Oh, Florence." "My husband died last August," she said. "I'm so sorry. You came too late to thank him in person. Florence's face fell, but only briefly. She nodded the way a woman nods when she has already prepared herself for an outcome she did not want. "But I can tell you about your mother," Adelaide said. "I can show you his file. He kept everything. He always kept everything. There are photographs in there I think she sent him over the years. There are her letters. There are notes he made in his own hand about her, about the kind of woman she was, because he met her, Florence. He met her twice. He drove down to Lewiston in 2018 and again in 2020. He wanted to know the people he was searching for. He believed they deserved that much. Come inside. Come upstairs. Let me show you who your mother was." Florence wept the way the people in Mortimer's photographs wept. Adelaide led her up the stairs, down the long hallway to the back room. She unlocked the door. She turned on the light. She walked to Cabinet 2, the one she had reorganized in March, where the closed but unfinished cases now lived, and she pulled out the file labeled Ainsworth M., and she set it on the work table for the daughter who had finally come. She left Florence alone in the room with her mother's papers. She went downstairs to put on more coffee. She sat in the kitchen and she looked out the window at the garden Mortimer had loved, and she let the long quiet of the house hold her, the way it had held him, the way it would hold whoever came after her. She had been given a locked door and an insulting inheritance. She had found behind that door a man she had loved completely without knowing him completely, and a body of work that had quietly mended thousands of broken things in the world while no one was watching, and a way of being a wife that was bigger than she had understood being a wife could be. Tabitha had wanted her dismissed. Mortimer had wanted her trusted. The trust had been the larger thing, and the trust had outlasted the dismissal, and that Adelaide thought was what 51 years of marriage had been for, to teach her what to do with the trust when it finally arrived. Upstairs, Florence was still in the room. Adelaide could hear very faintly the sound of a woman crying over papers her mother had touched. She let her cry. She sat in the kitchen and waited, the way Mortimer had taught her to wait. And she thought that the dead are not gone if their work continues, and the living are not alone if they pick that work up. And the silence between two people who have loved each other well is sometimes the loudest answer a marriage can leave behind. She poured a second cup of coffee for Florence and started up the stairs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.